أيوة روح. الله أكبر. جربوا يا جماعة. الله يرحم الجدار. روح.
This is quite a traumatic event for the Israelis, for the Jewish people. What is also obvious is that the Israeli military, the Israeli government, the Israeli state did not anticipate this, was caught quite by surprise. It has faced a catastrophe, a catastrophic failure, and there will be considerable amount of time and a great deal of soul searching that will follow this war, because so many things have gone wrong, from tactical all the way up to strategic to intelligence to so forth. However, the Israelis are tending to focus very much right now on getting the job done of whatever job that's going to be. And they don't necessarily engage in the self-recriminations at the moment, though everybody has those questions at the front of their mind. So that will be a major debate right after the end of the war. But for the moment, it's circling the wagons to prosecute what is coming. As I said, this war involved, though, a collapse of a number of security concepts, and we can get into those. But one of them is the image of Israeli strength has now also been collapsed. I mean, some of the other concepts that collapsed are Israeli-held concepts, but the image of Israeli power and capability has been severely tarnished. And I think that is something that won't wait till after the war to address, because it, quite frankly, affects the way the war needs to be prosecuted and what Israel needs to do at this point in the long run, in the short run, in order to secure itself in the long run. I urge everybody to take a look at Ron Dermer's statement yesterday to Dana Bash on CNN, especially the last 5 or 7 minutes of it, because he said something very important that I think gives us an indication where they're headed mentally and strategically and conceptually, which is one question that everybody asks. I was asked by several journalists yesterday and so forth, is we were in the middle of very serious discussions in the Middle East about peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Will this, and Israel is in a state of peace now with the UAE and Morocco and several other countries. Will this hurt or help peace? Was this, and clearly one of the objectives here by those who launched this war was to derail such peace talks. The answer to that really lies in the whole strategic question and the collapse that I just mentioned, which is, and what Ron Dermer said, which is it really depends on how the Israelis prosecute this war and wrap this war up. I know the common wisdom is that Israel has to be extremely cautious, and as difficult as it is for Israel, it must restrain itself to avoid awful images and so forth. But that said, of course, Israel needs to be careful, and of course, Israel needs to avoid civilian casualties. But that said, the image of weakness that Israel now suffers under because of the catastrophe of the last 48 hours is something that it cannot come out of the war from. If it does, it will affect both peace and war and in the future. Ron Dermer's statement at the end essentially boiled down to nobody wants to make peace with weak people. They want Israel to be strong. And I've seen some quiet communications that do indicate that those in the region who want to make peace with Israel fully understand what Israel has to do here. It has to essentially achieve a strategic victory on a level that erases and overpowers, transcends, so to speak, the strategic defeat, the image defeat, the stature, defeat of its stature that it has suffered in the last 48 hours. And this, I think, quite frankly, many Israelis are saying that even a very strong escalation of the sort of policies that had been for the last 20, 30 years are no longer capable of being, no longer capable of delivering the sort of results Israel will need this time, specifically to administer a blow to Hamas that will be painful enough so that they know they should not do this again. They should never do this again. In other words, to reestablish deterrence. And I think what a lot of Israelis are beginning to say, and it's consistent with the things Ron Dermer is saying, are that the deterrence failed. That it wasn't that Hamas didn't understand Israeli power, nor did they not understand Israeli capabilities and what certainly Israel's response will be. It is that they had other calculations, and those calculations don't necessarily even come from Gaza. They may come from Tehran, and it is the Israeli view that Tehran was very much behind this conflagration. So the real answer to what happened here is in Tehran, and Hamas is answering essentially to Tehran's demands. Under those circumstances, the response has to be not to what I'm hearing Israelis say is the response has to be not to mow the lawn, so to speak, at a higher level, not to reinstitute a sense of deterrence against Hamas, but essentially to disable them completely, whether that involves a complete reoccupation of Gaza or just the destruction of their entire military structure. I think, which I don't know, but I find it quite difficult to understand how you can fully disarm Hamas without some degree of reoccupation. So I do believe we're heading for a very substantial ground operation and a very substantial change of circumstance in Gaza. That said, there are also strong voices in Israel, not on the right only, also in the center and center left, who, while they are very dreadful of a war with Hezbollah, do understand that this is quite possibly going to extend into Hezbollah. And as we speak, there are red alert sirens in northern Israel anyway. So the pretext, or not the pretext, the justification is there. There is violence being done already. Some missiles, and it might not be Hezbollah. It may be Hamas units in Lebanon, and they may be only one or two missiles. But at any rate, the justification is already there. But the bottom line is that I'm hearing a number of Israelis say, and again, I emphasize, this is not from one side of the political spectrum. This is sprinkled throughout the political spectrum, that Israel needs to treat this as a strategic event that brings the war to Tehran. And by that doesn't mean that Israel strikes Tehran, nor that even Israel has the capability to meaningfully strike Tehran. But what it does mean is that Israel has to deliver a strategic blow to Iran's interests, that at the end of the war, it is Iran that feels strategic pressure and is on the strategic defensive, and that the momentum strategically in the region, geopolitically, is against Iran at the end, not against Israel. Currently, it is against Israel because of the perception of weakness. And that the destruction of Hezbollah, which may happen if this war spreads to the north, certainly the Israeli aim, if the war spreads to the north, is to destroy Hezbollah. If that happens, then that has grave implications for the survival of the regime in Syria, because the regime in Syria counts heavily on Hezbollah and IRGC support, which is through Hezbollah. So if that structure is devastated by the Israeli defense forces in response to an escalation in the north, then one begins to imagine the sort of strategic blow that Tehran could suffer. Already, it depends on the sort of image that is projected through Hezbollah's strength. This could really have ripple effects that go back to Iran and can also encourage Iranians to challenge their regime, which we've seen over the last year and a half. So I believe that what we're seeing right now, first of all, The catastrophe is the first 48 hours. The first phase of the war is wrapping up. The first phase being that Israel reestablishes control over its territory and begins to secure all its logistics lines and all entry points into Gaza, so that it doesn't have any threats behind its back while it deals with Gaza directly. And I think we're about to enter the second phase of the war. And the second phase of the war is an escalation in Gaza itself. And by that, I do not believe it will be limited to air power. I believe that it will be a ground invasion, potentially a reoccupation. And then that, of course, invites great pressure on Hezbollah to join in. Not that Hezbollah necessarily, we don't know Hezbollah's calculations. Our calculations, my calculations, I believe the Israeli government calculations, the American government calculations, up until now, I believe had been that precisely because Hezbollah is so central to the position of Iran in Lebanon and Iran in Syria, that they wouldn't risk themselves deeply for the sake of joining the war. But if Israel goes in on the ground, that could happen. So we'll see. But I'm just laying out where the strategic possibilities are, and what, knowing Ron Dermer, knowing the government, I believe that, and knowing even a national unity government who would be coming in that, I believe that we need to think that all the rules that we've seen until now are out the window, and that there's a major geopolitical event here, not just the restoration of the status quo ante in any shape or form.
Usually, most of the time, anytime that Israel is engaged in this type of military operation, it seems like there's always some kind of a deadline or period. That means that whenever the international crowd see the devastation in Gaza and the number of fatality actually rises, there's an immense pressure to Israel to kind of finish up the operation. What do you think that this time, is there any difference? I know that America has been providing a great support, but do you see any of like timeline that the Israel has to finish this war, or taking over the Hamas, or to wipe out the Hamas? Do you think there's some kind of a time limit that Israel needs to operate?
There's a number of time limits here. One is right out. You already hear calls for ceasefire. In fact, even Secretary Blinken, while he strongly supported Israel, he did say that he would like Hamas to return all the hostages and an immediate ceasefire. So the pressures for ceasefire will grow. Israel is under pressure to deliver this victory. It's a tall order, a big victory in a small amount of time, which again gravitates toward not luxuriously and slowly and very carefully entering Gaza, but going in fast and hard, and certainly minimizing casualties as much as are possible. But this is war, and we remember, in World War II and other wars where the rules Western powers operated under, the Israelis are not going to operate under such cruel rules, but they are going to probably operate more decisively and a bit rougher than they have in the past. There's another timeline that's not known internationally as much, which is the more this goes on with a missile war in the south, the more Israel is burning through its Iron Dome Tamir missiles. And it will run out. And the missiles from Gaza end when Israel goes in on the ground. Once Israel retakes Gaza, they can take all the missile batteries that they have, the anti-missile batteries that they have, and focus them on the north. The nightmare scenario for the Israelis is that they go a week or two shooting down 6,000 to 10,000 Hamas missiles, and then they have nothing left to stop the Hezbollah missiles. So that, again, puts a very sharp clock on the Israeli ground forces to go in decisively and early, so that Israel does not burn through its air defense capabilities that rapidly, and instead can move them to the north in preparation for what may be an escalation. And many Israelis assume that the chances are quite high of such an escalation. So yes, and then of course the world is going to start demanding a ceasefire, and I think at first the United States will probably help Israel avoid a Chapter 7, a legally binding UN Security Council resolution that demands a ceasefire. But we're talking weeks, not single weeks. We're not talking 2-3 months. So to deliver the sort of strategic blow that Israel will need to deliver to reassert its power and to reassert its credibility is going to be a tall order, and it speaks to decisiveness and quite an aggressive strategy rather than a luxuriously implemented one.